Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on all the various wildfires going on in California. Just based on the satellite imagery, you can see that we do have a lot to talk about today. We still have the Caldor Fire going on, the Dixie Fire, the Monument Fire, River Complex, Mcfarland Fire, Antelope Fire, and then down here we also have some of the new fires that have been popping up that we're talking about. We've got the French Fire, and then a number of fires in Southern California as well, including the South Fire, the Westward Fire. I think instead of me just listing, it'd be easier to just look at the list itself. You can see all the various fires that we have to talk about, and I'm going to spend the time depending on what I think is the biggest priority. So biggest priority I think is still the Caldor Fire right now, and then we're going to go to the Dixie Fire, then the Monument Fire, and then work our way down the list from there. So just looking at the satellite imagery throughout the day today, you can see that it looks very similar to what we were expecting to happen in yesterday's update and forecast. Remember, in yesterday's update and forecast, we were saying that there was going to be less winds throughout the day today. So instead of all that smoke just blowing right into Nevada, a lot of that smoke would be actually settling in over our fires. And that seems to be exactly what happened. You see that smoke settling over the Monument Fire, see the smoke settling over the Dixie Fire, and over the Caldor Fire as well. So, as always, that's a kind of good and bad thing when it comes to our wildfires. It's good because when you get a thick smoke layer like that, not as much sunlight can come through. It ends up being cooler than whatever the forecast was saying. But then with those cooler temperatures, then you also end up getting some weaker winds. So that's the good side of it. The bad side is then you're not able to use aircraft in some cases. And then also, obviously, the thing that most people think about when they think of smoke is the air quality impact. So kind of the two sides to the coin on that one. Just looking at it from a fire behavior perspective, I'm always kind of happy to see that smoke settle over the fires because it seems like whenever that happens, our fires significantly calm down. But you can see that overall throughout the day today, our fires were fairly active, and actually I shouldn't use past tense right there. They are fairly active. It almost looks like they're even picking up in the last hour or two. I can see somebody just mentioned Washington Fire. I will go to that one as well. We've got a whole long list. I'm going to go over the newer fires at the end of this video. I'm going to start with the Caldor, Dixie, and Monument first because you can see that those are the ones that appear to be the most active throughout the day today. And then I will also say that I have limited time for this update today, so unfortunately I'm not going to be looking at the live chat too closely throughout the course of this video. I'm just going to try to get all the most important information out there as fast as I can, and then I'll open the live chat back up, look at any questions that might have come up. So if you are in the live chat and somebody asks a question and you know the answer, then you could try to answer it, or I could try at the very end of the video. But without further ado, I think the one to dive into first is the Caldor Fire because that looks to be the most active wildfire throughout the day today. And then I also think that's the top priority moving forward because the projected spread of this fire based on the winds is in the exact direction we don't want it to be spreading towards a large amount of structures. So that's, again, I think the big story going on right now when it comes to wildfire in California. One thing I do want to check though, I haven't looked at this yet, but this is always a useful tool to look at. It's the natural color fire. It usually takes a second to reload and then it'll start going. So you can actually see where the fire is itself burning, and it looks like majority of the action on the Caldor Fire is that northeastern section right there. So that's pretty much what we were expecting yesterday. The winds were calmer throughout the day today, so we did have some moderated behavior, but we did still have those southwest winds in the afternoon, which acts to push the fire farther towards the northeast. So just looking at this map, I do want to point this out first because there is one thing I want to point out, and that's that there is a red flag warning in place over some parts of California. It looks like it does cover the Mcfarland Fire, so we'll dive into that red flag warning when we get to the Mcfarland Fire, but The good news is that it doesn't cover the Dixie Fire and the Caldor Fire, or the Monument for that matter. And that's some good news. Big reason that Caldor and Dixie aren't in that red flag is we actually have relatively diminished winds throughout the day that will take a throughout the day today and actually over the next couple of days, which is calming our fire behavior down somewhat. And we'll take a closer look at that when we come to the fire weather forecast. One quick tease on that fire weather forecast is, while I'd say we have more favorable conditions over the next couple of days, as we get into Monday and Tuesday, there might be some 40 to 45 mile per hour winds coming in. So while winds are cooperating right now, which is leading to some reduced fire behavior compared to some of the other days in the past, we do have that very critical forecast coming in Monday and Tuesday. So most likely going to have a red flag warning when that comes up, and we will certainly be following that forecast up till that event, and then when that event is actually happening. But just looking at the fire perimeter and hotspots for the Caldor Fire, few things I noticed. One, not many hotspots on that southern edge right there. That's a part of the fire where they have some good containment. You do notice these hotspots on the western side, and I'll actually flip to the other map because this, you're able to see the structures, which is the important part of that western side. The structures are the orange dots there that I'm flashing on and off. That's all the structures. So with that being said, you would be very worried about these red hotspots showing up on this western side. But the good news is that I believe those hotspots right there are only because of firing operations that have been put in place to purposely clear out some of the fuels. And when I listened to the Caldor Fire update, it sounded like those firing operations were successful. So it's a big flip side. When you first look at those hotspots, you think the fire is spreading into these communities where there's thousands of structures, but it's actually a successful firing operation, and a lot of the fuels are now cleared out of there. So should see even a better situation on this western edge than in the past. Overall, they sounded like they were feeling fairly confident over there. Now, while I say that, always make sure to stay updated with the most recent evacuation orders and warnings. Just in the 30 minutes since I watched the Caldor update, something might have changed. So that's why it is always good to stay updated with your local resources and not just take my word for it when I say that something is looking a lot better. But the big thing that you notice on the Caldor Fire is where the largest amount of those hotspots are, and it's clearly on that northeastern section of the fire. And that's because over the last few days we've had those southwesterly winds in the afternoon, which just act to push that fire forward, and then it can also lead to some spot fires. That was something that we had on this northern side right here, where right there across Highway 50, that was actually a spot fire that I believe grew to about 2,100 acres that crossed Highway 50 there. And if you don't know, a spot fire is where the winds pick up a burning ember. In some cases, it can toss it over a highway, or in cases like we saw in the Dixie Fire, it can toss it over the previous containment lines. And then it drops into the fuels, which are at record low levels record low fuel moisture levels right now. So the driest fuels we've ever had. And then there's about a 90 to 100% ignition rate for those burning embers in those dry fuels. Starts a spot fire, its own little fire, and then that starts to take off. And just looking at this map, it looks like the spot fire has officially merged with the Caldor Fire at this point. Before it almost just looked like its own fire up there. But you can see where the majority of those hot spots have been over the last couple days. And the good news for throughout the day today, and we were talking about this last night, is those 35 mile per hour winds that we were getting in the afternoon that were just pushing this fire forward like crazy seemed to calm down somewhat throughout the day today, down to maybe 20 to 25 miles per hour. And I would imagine even actually less, because we had that nice smoke inversion over the Caldor Fire. Because that smoke inversion, maybe our winds were just around 10 to 15 miles per hour. So weather cooperated throughout the day today, and the reason that was so critical is you can see all of these structures that we have to the northeast of where the Caldor Fire is the most active. So that's why we're talking about the Caldor Fire first, is because the predominant wind direction in this area is from the southwest. which means that your predominant fire spread direction is going to be towards the northeast, and you can see all of those structures that we have to the northeast of this fire. So that's why the Caldor Fire is the big story throughout the day today, and actually it's going to be the big story over the next few days, because like I teased for the fire weather forecast, come Monday and Tuesday, those winds that are calmer over the next couple of days are going to be picking up Monday and Tuesday to around 40, maybe even 45 miles per hour. So that's where this northeastern section is going to get very challenging. So that's why we're going to be keeping a very close eye on up there. But some of the good news is not many hotspots on that southern edge there. It sounds like they've had some successful structure protection, firing operations, and containment lines being put in place on this western edge. And then on this eastern edge, you could call that eastern, it sounds like they've had some successful firing operations there as well. So it's really that northeastern section that we're mostly worried about at this point. And I'm interested to see where the live hotspots are at this point. And this does create some cause for concern, because it looks, based on this map, that those hotspots are reaching into where we see some of those structures right there. But I will say, as I always do when it comes to this map, these heat signatures are basically picked up from a satellite in space. It's having to go through this thick smoke layer to try to figure out where that heat is. So I always say that this map isn't perfect. Sometimes you can take it with a grain of salt, but that is a pretty good example of why we're mostly focused on this northeastern section of the Caldor Fire. Now, one thing I'll say that's interesting on this map is you notice how this color changes up here. So that's because the fuels are changing. So down here where you see that dark green, that's part of the reason that the fire has been growing as fast as it has. There's a large amount of fuels, they're critically dry. You also can see that there's a lot of steep terrain throughout this area. In some cases, some canyons that can funnel winds. So that's why this fire has been moving so fast. But that's where I think this might actually be some good news as it starts to push up into these higher elevations. You notice that that green color where we have very thick, dry fuels looks like it's going to be transitioning to some granite. So as we saw in the Creek Fire last year, as that happens, the fire should basically stop in its tracks. This was something that we actually saw in the Creek Fire, where it was burning thousands of acres a day in the heavy, dry, dead fuels. And then right when it reached high enough elevation where it was mostly granite instead of fuels, the fire just stopped in its tracks. So that's what I'm hoping on this northern side, which would be good news for the Lake Tahoe area, for this fire not to be able to wrap around in that direction. But where I do think the concern remains is if the fire were to move. It looks, just based on the topographic shading here, that there is some kind of canyon or drainage right here, and it does look like we have fairly continuous fuels through here as well. So I think that's my main concern. I do know they have some containment lines right here, and as of right now, those containment lines are holding. Big thanks to all of the Cal Fire and U.S. Forest Service representatives on this fire doing the hard work to put those containment lines in place. And then also, big thank you to the winds for finally calming down throughout the day today. So we had some reduced behavior, but that is certainly going to be the key area to watch, because right there you see we do have what looks to be some continuous fuels. We have some drainages or canyons that can funnel some winds, and then like I said, we do have those strong winds coming in Monday and Tuesday. So that will be the area of the Caldor Fire that we continue to watch the most closely. So I'm interested to see what the Caldor Fire looked like throughout the day today. And this is going to be, I believe it's a 3-hour time lapse. So you can see that smoke plume off in the distance right here. But the big thing that you notice is how little you can see on this throughout this live, or this time lapse. So compared to the past days where we had those strong winds coming in, the smoke plume was blowing out and you could see it perfectly because so much of the smoke was clearing out that none of that smoke was able to settle down to the surface because the winds were strong enough just to push that smoke directly into Lake Tahoe, where the air quality has been one of the worst spots in the world over the last week. But like I say, I know this looks just absolutely apocalyptic, but sometimes this is actually the best thing to see over a fire, because if you think about the sunlight and the solar radiation trying to break through all that smoke, it's going to have a much harder time. And we've seen this on a number of fires this year where the forecast will be for 95 degrees and 25 mile per hour winds. And then when you get some thick smoke shading like this, it only ends up being 70 degrees and 10 mile per hour winds. So I believe that's part of the reason we had some reduced behavior on the Caldor Fire throughout the day today. Again, obviously we do still have a large amount of activity going on, large amount of hotspots on that northeastern section, and you can see that there was a large amount of smoke being produced today, but that because of that smoke shading, it was better than it could have been if those strong winds had just continued to push the smoke out and continue to spread the fire forward. So overall, while that looks apocalyptic, I would say that most likely actually kept our fire behavior down for the day. Now, you might also be thinking about air quality concerns and the ability to use aircraft. That is the one downside of all that smoke, but overall, when it comes to fire behavior, I would always say it's good to see a thick smoke layer like that. So when it comes to the Caldor Fire, this was updated at 10:42. Let's see if it's been updated. Oh yeah, just updated 7:48. So very, very new report. It's only 7:57 right now. So Caldor Fire is at about 140,000 acres at this point, and still only at 12% containment. So when it comes to that acreage burned right there, I found a pretty cool map to show you. I'll try to explain what this is showing. So where you have those kind of cooler colors, like the green to the yellow right there, that's where the fire started, and then where it was originally spreading on the 15th, the 16th, and the 17th. So it looks like it started right down here. That's what you would call the ignition point or the heel of the fire, and then you can see how it has spread out ever since then. So you have those fingers on the western edge of the fire. You can see a lot of that growth is in the very recent days where you have that purple color that looks like it's the 24th and the 25th. But like I said, pretty sure that is actually due to some firing operations where they're purposely clearing out some of the fuels. Now, where this wildfire has been able to just extend on its own, fueled by those southwesterly winds, is to the northeast, where you see that dark red to purplish color. That shows where most of the growth has been over the last 3 to 4 days. As you look 23rd, 24th, 25th, it's all those colors right there. You can see where that spot fire was able to jump Highway 50, and then you can see where this fire continues to extend towards the northeast. So I wanted to show this map because I think it is a better way of looking. Instead of just saying 140,000 acres, this is a way to actually see those acres and also see how they have progressed throughout time. Again, most of the recent growth has been to the northeast because the predominant wind direction is from the southwest, and that is the reason that I'm concerned about all of these structures up here, because as you can see, majority of the growth over the last few days has been in that direction. So the one other thing that I wanted to show is where it says 12% containment. You can look at this map right here if it decides to pop up. Again, it might be a little hard to see, but where you have the red line, that is where the fire is uncontained. And then where you have the black line, that is where the fire is contained. So looks like the containment that we have is on that southern edge right there and that western edge right there, where you do see that black line in place. And I would say that's not too big of a surprise, because if you look at the fire perimeter, it's right on that southern edge and that western area right there where we almost had no hotspots whatsoever yesterday. Now, we didn't have very many hotspots on this northwestern edge either, but that is an area where there's still a lot of fuels and very rugged terrain up here. So I know they are still working in that area, but looks like we're contained on that western and southern edge where we didn't have very much activity over the last couple of days. But no surprise here, where the fire is still uncontained is on that northeastern edge and that that spot fire that was able to jump Highway 50. So I imagine that's going to be the main concern moving forward. And actually, one thing we can do, this might be really hard to see because you might be able to see it. So if you look really closely, you can see these almost little X's in lines. So that's where they have those containment lines. So the good news is that we do have some containment lines put in place on this northeastern section to try to stop some of that growth farther to the northeast. And one other thing I heard that they were talking about is trying to conduct some firing operations to clear out some of the fuels around this area so that by the time the fire gets to it, those fuels aren't there anymore, so then the fire hopefully would stop in its tracks. Now, I would say that my big concern moving forward is, even though we have those containment lines in place, my big concern is as we get into Monday and Tuesday, the possibility of spot fires being able to just jump over those containment lines. I'm not saying that to try to scare anybody, but this is something that we saw on the Dixie Fire this year, where we had an amazing firing operation basically around the entire northern part of the fire. And then we were looking great up there. It almost looked like we were wrapped up on the northern edge. And then some strong winds came in, got some burning embers, threw it over the containment lines, and then the fire grew 15 miles in one day. Now, I'm not saying that this northeastern section is going to grow 15 miles in one day if it were to jump. I'm just saying that the possibility of it jumping is the main thing that I'm worried about moving forward. But the good news is, like I said, we do have some calmer winds over the next couple of days, so hopefully they'll be able to just do some great operations in this area, do that firing operation, create what they call a catcher's mitt, so you almost kind of catch the fire when it comes in there, and then there's not as much fuel for it to burn. But that's something that we're just going to have to continue to follow over the next couple of days. So that's the evacuation map. And when it comes to those evacuation orders, I almost purposely don't go over them in depth throughout these videos because I know maybe half the people who watch these videos watch it actually after the live stream. So when it comes to evacuation orders and warnings, I put the links in the description, especially for the Cal Fire pages. Then you can go down in here where they have a lot of those evacuation warnings and orders in place, so the link for that is in the description. So I always suggest you should just get that kind of information straight from the source, because who knows, by the time you're watching this video, if you're not live, the warnings and orders may have changed. Now, where some of the bad news comes in is you can see that we are up to 650 structures destroyed on the Caldor Fire. Now, one thing I will say about that is I believe most of that was actually towards the more beginning of this fire. If we go back to this map where you can see it was the 15th and the 16th where it looked like it went through Grizzly Flats, maybe into the 17th and 18th as well. It was around that area. And if we look at the structures map, that's where you can see the large amount of structures right there that are within that fire perimeter. When the fire went through Grizzly Flats at what appears to be the 15th, 16th, and 17th, I believe that's when the majority of those structures were destroyed. The only reason that I think it's continued to jump up over the last couple of days is because it takes some time for the damage assessment teams to be able to go into those areas and actually count all the structures. So I don't believe there's actually been any new structures destroyed in the last couple of days. I think the only reason we're seeing that jump up is some of the information of what burned on the 15th, 16th, and 17th is still trickling back to the Cal Fire page right there. Now, where we do have some good news is it looks like we just continue to get more and more resources on this fire. We have 21 helicopters, 243 engines, 51 dozers, 27 water tenders, almost 3,000 personnel at this point. So that's significantly up. It looks like California is making this more and more of a priority, and 80 crews as well. So lots of resources on this fire. Seems like we keep getting more every single day. So I'd say that's some good news. And what I'm hoping is that they're going to be able to just get those resources in there, get the dozers, some planes, hopefully to drop some retardant if it's not too smoky and if they actually can fly some of those planes to drop some of the retardant in there, get some dozer lines, and really try to get some great containment on that northeastern edge before those winds come in. So that might actually be where we should transition to next. It's that fire weather forecast, and I think this basically sums it up. So this is showing the 500 millibar pressure map, and just over the next couple of days, you can see that that ridge that we were talking about yesterday is just going to continue to fill in. And I think the best way to read a map like this is where you see all these lines. Those are called isobars, lines of constant pressure. And what you want to do is look how close they are together. So this is now getting into Saturday. You can see how far apart those lines are over California. That means you're going to have relatively weak winds. Now, when we get into Monday and Tuesday, you can see that it almost looks like this trough pattern starts to come in, and those lines get a lot closer together. So that's where you start to get strong winds. And you also notice what direction those winds are coming from. It's from the southwest. If you have a low pressure system like that, your winds are counterclockwise. So it means on the bottom of that low, you're going to have winds blowing in from the southwest. And unfortunately, it looks like as those isobars get closer together, those winds are going to be stronger. So if we look at the forecast for tomorrow, let's see if we can see some of that information that we were just talking about actually play out on the forecast. I tried to pick this. I believe I picked it right over Strawberry. Let's go to Strawberry right there, because I think the fire's not in Strawberry yet, as far as I know. But I want to look at the forecast there, because the key thing that I'm worried about is strong winds being able to take some burning embers and drop them farther to the northeast. So it is important to look at winds actually right on the fire perimeter's edge or to the northeast of the fire to figure out what that potential for spot fires may be. So if we look in there, that basically paints the picture of what I was talking about when that high pressure system continues to fill in over the next couple of days. Those isobars get very far apart. You have very weak winds, and well, you might still think 20 to 25 miles per hour is strong winds. That's much better than we were seeing in the past, and it looks like that's going to be the case throughout the day tomorrow. And because of that, we're most likely going to see even more of a smoke inversion throughout the day tomorrow, because with less winds, less of that smoke just gets pushed into Nevada. More of it settles down over the fire, like you actually see happen throughout the day today. So while the temperature forecast for tomorrow says 76 degrees in this area, it looks like we're in the high 80s on the western edge of the fire. But if we get that smoke inversion, that might actually be in the 60s, and the western edge of the fire might actually be in the low 70s. Now, key thing that we want to look at is how these winds, and in particular the wind gusts, are going to be changing over time. So Saturday, it looks like once again we have relatively weak winds. That's probably going to be another day where the air quality is terrible, but that thick smoke inversion is keeping our fire behavior down. Then Sunday, we start to see the first little remnants of that low pressure system starting to build into California. We start to pick back up our winds to about 30 miles per hour. And then Monday is where I think things could start to get a little, I feel like sketchy is not a very professional word, but it kind of works in this situation. On that northeastern section, if we have these 40 to 45 mile per hour winds, it is certainly going to challenge any containment lines that they've put in place right here, because the potential for burning embers being picked up, spotted over those lines, and then fueling more growth to the northeast will be high. But with that being said, we have Friday, Saturday, and part of Sunday to really prepare for these strong winds coming in. Now, when we look at Tuesday, it looks like Tuesday is another day of very strong winds. So, like I said, Monday, Tuesday is going to be the key fire weather day that we're talking about over the next few days, and in particularly on that northeastern section of the Caldor Fire, where it does look like there are a large amount of structures to the northeast of there, and we're going to be keeping a very close eye on and crossing our fingers, hoping that they can really get some great containment while the winds are weak over the next 3 days, and hopefully that smoke inversion really comes into play over the next couple of days and calms that northeastern section of the fire down. So I think that basically sums it up. The southern edge is contained. The western edge is looking better. While it looks like those are hot spots, those were actually successful firing operations. The northeastern section should remain calmer for the next 3 days as the winds are weaker, which will allow a thick smoke inversion to stay over the fire, which will keep our fire behavior down. But then the big story is that on Monday and Tuesday, we have those 40 to 45 mile per hour winds coming in. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye on that northeastern section of the Caldor Fire moving forward from there. So I think that wraps up the Caldor Fire. Just in case you're just tuning in, I'll just show the numbers one more time. Caldor Fire is up to 140,000 acres and remains at 12% containment. So just going to take one quick sip of water here, and then I'm also going to just take a quick peek at the live chat, make sure my sound is working. This is something that I try to do throughout the videos because, like I said, one time I did a 40-minute live stream and my sound wasn't on the entire time and I hadn't checked the live chat. So looks like the sound is all good. Thank you very much, John, for the super chat, and thank you also, Lucy, for always doing such a great job of moderating. I can't scroll through everything that's going on in the live chat yet and look at all the comments, but it looks like things are staying relatively civil, so thank you very much, Lucy, for moderating. Now, I'm actually very glad that I looked at the live chat because I realized I forgot something on the Caldor Fire. So this kind of wraps up everything that we were just talking about. This is the Wharf S-Fire wildfire simulation model that we run out of the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory. And I might be a little biased because I go to San Jose State, but it is one of the top wildfire models in the world. It combines the fire perimeter and those hotspots with the fuel, weather, topography variables. And then the big thing that sets this model apart is it's able to simulate how the wildfire is going to create its own weather, and then how that weather is then going to come back and impact the wildfire. So I try to show these. I'll be showing this for the Caldor and the Dixie Fire. We've run 2 simulations throughout the day today, but key thing that I always say before I show it is an experimental forecast only, doesn't take into account those fire suppression tactics. And I've also noticed in the past that it doesn't seem to take into account when you have smoke coming in from other fires as well, and doesn't seem to take into account if you have a very thick smoke inversion, how that can reduce fire behavior. So with that being said, we will click play. Right on the bottom you can see where the little clock is. So this is going to be a simulation for what happened throughout the day today, because we ran this model early this morning. And then it's also going to be showing us what is expected to happen tomorrow. So just based on where you start to see some of those colors popping up and where you see the fire extending itself, looks like the model throughout the day today was predicting more growth on the north, the northeast, and that eastern edge right there, which seems to be pretty spot on with what actually ended up happening. If we just pause that right there, you can see where it was predicting most of that growth based on that blue color right there. And if we actually look at where the live hotspots are, it almost looks like, just waiting for it to load, have about 50 tabs open, almost looks like it's a perfect match with what this model is saying. So looks like the model did very well throughout the day today. I'm interested to see what it shows for tomorrow, because tomorrow is another day where we have those weaker winds. Now, this is now getting into about 10 a.m. tomorrow. Looks like it's relatively weak winds. You don't see very large vectors up there, but it does look like they're going to be blowing again from that southwesterly direction, which continues to fuel some of that growth towards the north. And then it looks like those winds turn around as we get into the nighttime hours and then start to fuel more growth to the south. Now, I'm just going to stop right there and go back to the beginning because I think that model got a little out of hand at the end there. Now, again, you see all that growth that it's simulating right there. That is most likely what the wildfire would do in the absence of any fire personnel or the 3,000 personnel that we have on the Caldor Fire right now. So luckily we have 21 helicopters, 250 engines, 3,000 personnel. So that's why I'm not actually expecting the Caldor Fire to look like that throughout the day tomorrow. And especially not on that western side. It seems like they're feeling fairly confident on that western side. But one thing you can take from this is where the model overall is predicting continued growth. It looks like most of that growth that it's predicting is on that northern edge and that eastern edge there. So that is most likely where we will continue to see some growth over the next couple of days. Although, as the winds remain weak and the smoke inversion, I think, in my prediction, is going to be very intact tomorrow and even stronger than it was throughout the day today, I would imagine we end up getting less growth on the Caldor Fire than that model is showing. But again, we'll just have to stay tuned to actually see what ends up happening. So now I'm going to take a sip of water. Kind of got delayed there for a second. Alrighty, so next fire that we're going to go into is the Dixie Fire. And it almost looks like it's two separate fires at this point because it's so far away, but believe it or not, that's actually just the two different edges of the Dixie Fire. And it looks like the fire behavior was relatively calm early this morning, just had that light smoke, and then as we got into the afternoon hours and then getting into right about now, that's where you start to see those large smoke plumes pop up, and in some cases looks like we even get some pyrocumulus clouds where you see that white puffy color right there, and then you could see one on the northern spot as well. That's where you get that large smoke plume. So I am interested to see what the camera looked like on the Dixie Fire throughout the day today. Now, I couldn't really find a good camera that was showing the plume itself. This is the angle we were looking at yesterday when we saw that plume popping up right there. You can see where the smoke is, but it doesn't look like the camera is centered on the smoke plume itself. But one thing that you notice is how much more smoke seems to be produced as you get into the last few hours of this imagery. Still had blue skies throughout much of the day, and then once that fire started to pick up, that's where the visibility went way down. I'm just gonna try to see if there's any other camera in here that has that smoke plume in it. I was looking before this video and I couldn't find any, but yeah, it doesn't really look like we can see that smoke plume throughout the day today. But based on the satellite imagery, you can see that it was in fact there. And if we want to see where the active hotspots are on the Dixie Fire, that's a big thing that we were looking at yesterday because it matches the satellite data almost perfectly. Most of those hotspots are either in that northern edge up there or that southeastern edge down there. And just to prove that this all is part of one fire, you can see in this fire perimeter where we had those hotspots yesterday, up on the northern edge, down here on the southeast, and then you do still see some activity on that one spot fire that happened maybe a week or two ago, the one that did move into Janesville. But the good news on that one is if we look at the live hotspot imagery, looks like there's a very little amount of heat still going on with that spot fire, and I believe some of the evacuation warnings in Janesville proper have even been lifted throughout the day today. Again, never take my word for it. Go to the links in the description for all the most recent information. But that spot fire up here is looking much, much better on the Dixie Fire than it was in the past. Now, other areas where we're looking much, much better on the Dixie Fire than in the past, big things I'm happy to see is, one, that spot fire around Janesville and Milford starting to calm down. Hopefully that last remaining heat will just be gone throughout the day tomorrow. And then other places where I love to see that those hotspots are no longer intact is on that north shore of Lake Almanor. That was an area that we were very concerned about at one point because we had those northerly winds pushing the fire down close to these structures here. But as of right now, it doesn't look like there's any heat in that area. And not just that map showing it. If we look at this map as well, not seeing any smoke plume coming up right there. Although I imagine the air quality is fairly poor as that smoke has been able to settle over the Dixie Fire with those weaker winds that we had throughout the day today. So that's good news. Doesn't look like there's much heat there anymore. Or around Westwood. At one point we had heat signatures being pushed down closer to Westwood on this northeastern side, but looks like that's basically wrapped up. And then at one point we also had a finger of the fire pushing up towards Susanville, and it looks like that has reduced in activity as well. But with that being said, we do have the two areas of the fire that do remain very active. As you could see on the satellite imagery throughout the last couple of hours, we get those pyrocumulus clouds popping up, and that is on the northern section and that southeastern section. Looks like the southeastern section was especially active, so I'm interested to see what the natural color fire looks like, because I imagine that even as we get into the overnight hours or nighttime hours, we're still going to see a large amount of heat popping up right there. So it'll reset. Looks like the northern edge was more active early, and then it was calm throughout much of the morning, and then it really started to pick up over the last couple of hours, and especially that southeastern section there, and it looks like it still is active up to this point. So with that northern section, that one's, I believe they're passing it over to some other new team at this point, and as of right now, and based on the CAL FIRE update, it sounded like they were feeling fairly confident in this area. It sounded like they had some good containment lines, some good strategy put in place before they pass it off to the other team. And you can also see not very many structures around that hotspot right there. So I think the big concern remaining on the Dixie Fire is this hotspot down here. You can see that it does look like there are some of those structures underneath that hotspot flashing those orange dots on and off right there. So I'm going to have to check and see if this has led to any new structures destroyed in this area. Actually, I believe I have that map. So we can actually see if it has popped up. So scrolling down here, you can see where I put all these links in the description. So Dixie Fire damage assessment map. I've never actually done this before, so hopefully it doesn't like end the live stream or anything. So coming back here, I want to see if we can see if there's any new damage assessment reports coming out of that area right there. So looking right here, this will load up. So this is where the CAL FIRE teams go into the areas where the Dixie Fire did go through some structures, and then they actually will post where, if you see those black structures right there, that means there's no damage. Where you see those red structures, that means the structure is greater than 50% destroyed. So let's try to match up these two different maps that we're looking at. So this, I'll bring it over right next to the other tab. So this one shows, I believe that's Greenville right there, Taylorsville up here. Looks like the hotspot is directly southeast of Taylorsville. So looking in here, there's Greenville right there. And then you see the fire wrap around like that. Where we have a lot of those hotspots, I believe it's right on that part of the fire. It might be easier to see if we turn this on. So it looks like it's mostly down on that southern edge right there, but doesn't look like there's been any damage assessment reports coming out of that area. If there was, we would see some of these, more of these houses right there, but doesn't look like we have any information coming out of that area yet. So we'll just have to stay tuned to see once those damage assessment reports come back if we actually have lost some of the structures that appear to be under that hotspot as of right now. Now, one thing I will say is, based on previous days, it looks like this is looking better around the Taylorsville area than in previous days. There was some days where that hotspot was going right up against where we had some of those structures, but it sounds like Cal Fire just put a ton of resources into this area. They sounded like they had this whole plumbing operation where they had run water to every single house. They had dozer lines being put in place, I believe dropping retardant as well. So as far as I know, the fire never actually extended into Taylorsville, but that is something that I do need to check up on. But coming back to this map, I do just want to show where we did get some of that new information back from those damage assessment teams. Some of the information does still trickle in from this spot fire that we had go into the Janesville area, and then you can see where we do still have some activity on that spot fire is directly over those structures. And it looks like some of the information in that area is in fact back, where we see a large amount of those structures where it does look like they have been destroyed. And one thing you can do on this map, you can zoom all the way in and actually find the structure that you're looking for, and then you can click on it and also see a photo of what it actually looks like. So I usually don't like to spend too long doing this because it's pretty just devastating to look at. Basically, no matter what house you click on, it seems like most of them will just be basically just nothing left. It shows how hot the fire is when it comes through, that it pretty much just clears things to the ground, but it also really does put things into perspective because it's not just maps and little colored houses that we're looking at. You do have to be reminded every once in a while that it is somebody's entire life that has been affected by these fires. So as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. Not only Dixie, but all the other ones in California as well. Or throughout the world as well. I shouldn't just make it exclusive to California. But wrapping up the Dixie Fire hotspot map, I think this is the area that we're going to watch the closest as we move forward, because you can see that is the part of the fire where we do still have hotspots in place around some of those structures. The good news is I think that's, while it does look very active right now, I think we're going to have a thicker smoke inversion throughout the day tomorrow, which will hopefully keep some of that behavior down. And I also do know that we still have a very large amount of resources on the Dixie Fire. So I'm sure that is a top priority to make sure that that area that we're seeing so much activity on right there doesn't get out of control at any point. So now let's actually check out the numbers for the Dixie Fire. I'll see if this was updated at 7 p.m. It usually is. Yeah, so you can see we're at about 750,000 acres. One thing I will point out is overall, it seems like the overall growth on the Dixie Fire has been slowing down over the last maybe week. It seems like, I shouldn't say week, because actually, we can look at the map for this to see when all of this fire activity happens. So that's going to be basically impossible to read unless we zoom in right there. Oh, it even gives how many acres burned each day. So that's very interesting to look at. I might have to turn that into a plot so we can see how it's progressing over time. Does look like actually 12,000 acres burned yesterday. So that's more than I was expecting, but you can see going way back in time, that 12,000 acres seems like nothing when you compare it to the 5th, where we burned 114,000 acres in one day. I believe that was the day where the Dixie Fire grew. Let's see if we could see what color that is. So that's kind of that bright green color. So yeah, I think that's that day where the Dixie Fire jumped the containment lines. We had some strong, oh shoot, I just clicked away. Was trying to scroll away, so that'll take a second to load back up. So what I was trying to say is, well, actually, first thing I should say is the colors on this map show the progression of the fire. So where you have those colder colors, that's where the fire was originally. You can see where the ignition point was. And then it basically, because of those strong southwesterly winds that we almost always get in the afternoon in this area, most of the recent growth has either been to the north, where you can see that red growth, where it's the more recent growth on the Dixie Fire, or down here in the southeast, where we had that recent growth, and then also that spot fire that occurred, I believe, about maybe a week ago at this point. But right here, that was that day where we burned over 100,000 acres in one day. It was both on this northern section and this northeastern section there. It was where some winds picked up some burning embers, threw it over containment lines. We had an amazing firing operation put in place on this northern section, and then the winds came in, threw some embers over those containment lines, and then it took off basically 15 miles in one day. So this is the first time I've shown this map, but it's very interesting to look at that one crazy day that we had where it burned over 100,000 acres, and then you can also see where the recent growth has been on the northern edge of the fire and down to the southeast right there. So when you look at it that way, you can see that much less growth recently than in the past. But that one spot fire did end up being fairly big that we had just a number of days ago. So when it comes to the numbers, again, we're at 750,000 acres and containment is at 45%. So if we want to look at where the containment is, the red line is where the fire is uncontained, the black line is where the fire is contained. And again, key places that I love to see that containment, you can see it's all around Chester. It's to the west of Westwood, that's good to see. It's all north of Quincy where we have that black line and the fire is contained. Where I expect we'll see some new containment popping up over the next couple days is that northern shore of Lake Almanor, and that eastern area around Westwood. Seems like there's been some good progress done there, and when we're looking at the hotspot map, basically looks like there's no hotspots remaining there. So I expect to continue to get some good news out of those areas. But then also the other good news to see is that eastern edge of the spot fire that worked its way into Janesville, already seeing some containment there. So that is great to see, and also protecting any southern or southeastern progression that might have happened into Milford. So looking good on that spot fire as well. Now, no surprise where we're still uncontained on that northern section where there's just a lot of steep, rugged terrain. It's hard to get some containment up there, and that is one of the areas where the fire remains very active. But then also down in this area where that is also one of the areas where it does remain extremely active. So with just zooming out, you can see southern edge, very contained, nothing but black line right there, but still some spots where they're continuing to focus on moving forward. Now, when it comes to all the evacuation warnings, just like the Caldor Fire, I purposely don't go through all of those. And even if I say one area might be looking good, never take my word for it. Always click the link in the description and get the information straight from the source based on the most recent evacuation warnings and orders. Now, one thing I do want to show, though, just a quick snapshot of the evacuation warning and order map. I believe there were some orders that were lifted throughout the day today, but again, when it comes to the individual warnings and orders and how they're changing, the link is in the description for both this map and this page on CAL FIRE where you can go and see all the most recent information. Now, unfortunately, you can see that we're up to 1,273 structures destroyed, and I actually wasn't planning to do this, but I want to see how that ranks compared to other wildfires in California. So this would be, well, when it comes to top 20 largest California wildfires, you can see that Dixie Fire is number 2 at about 750,000 acres. It's going to be very interesting to see if we cross the August complex. Based on everything that's going on right now, I, knock on wood, but I don't think the Dixie Fire is going to become the number 1 largest wildfire in the history of California. But again, once I show the fire weather forecast, we are going to have some challenging conditions coming in Monday and Tuesday, so I can't get too confident too fast. But the one thing that I did want to see is how that destructive So it looks like the Dixie Fire is the 14th most destructive California wildfire in recorded history, with again that 1,273 structures destroyed. We are looking at some of the images earlier, and as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected. Now, when it comes to the resources assigned, that's where you could call this good news and bad news. The good news is we still have a massive amount of resources on the Dixie Fire. We have 21 helicopters, 370 engines, 172 dozers, 167 water tenders, 4,833 personnel, and 73 crews. So that's still good news. We still have a massive amount of resources, I believe more than any other fire that we're going to be looking at throughout the course of this video. But you do notice that it is significantly down, and not a big surprise there, just based on that satellite imagery. There are lots of wildfires going on throughout California, and we keep picking up more and more resources on the Caldor Fire. I don't know if that's directly personnel from the Dixie Fire going down to the Caldor Fire, but you do notice that Dixie Fire, less resources than previous days, but still a very large amount of resources in place. Now, when it comes to what's going to be happening to the Dixie Fire over the next couple of days, I would say it's a similar forecast to the Caldor Fire, but not as critical. So over the next couple of days, we have that high pressure system moving in over California. That's going to bring some weaker winds, which will calm the fire behavior down. It'll also most likely lead to a smoke inversion, which acts to calm the fire down even more. But then as we get into Monday and Tuesday, you see that trough move in. Those isobars get a lot closer together, which means your winds are going to be picking up. And then you also notice what direction they're coming from the southwest. So interested to see, you can see why the Caldor Fire was the top story. We talked about that one first. Monday, Tuesday, they're going to have some 40 to 45 mile per hour winds blowing from the southwest, which is going to possibly create a critical situation on that northeastern section of the fire. That's the big thing that we're continuing to watch. But right here, so let's look at, I bet that's right about where those hot spots are. So looking at tomorrow, the forecast for tomorrow, you can see matches what we were saying earlier almost perfectly. As that high pressure system comes in, the winds calm down, and you can see that on the map right there. Even in the peak of the afternoon, wind gusts in the teens, so much calmer winds throughout the day. Tomorrow, Saturday, looks like maybe a little bit stronger, but relatively speaking, that's still very calm winds. Sunday is when we started to see them pick up on the Caldor Fire. Looks like that's the same story on the Dixie Fire, getting some winds up to 30 to 35 miles per hour. And then Monday is when we really saw that low push in. That's where we get up to 35 to 40 miles per hour. And then Tuesday, looks like it's actually weaker on Tuesday for the Dixie Fire, which is different than the Caldor Fire, which was strongest on Tuesday. So Dixie Fire looks like Monday is going to be the key day to watch. But the good news is that tomorrow we have very weak winds. So it's going to be limited fire behavior tomorrow, which means the smoke inversion is most likely going to build in over the fire, which means that even though the temperature forecast says 86 degrees, if we have all that thick smoke just sitting directly over the Dixie Fire, not as much sunlight and solar radiation is going to be able to find its way in, which means that 86 degrees might end up actually just being a 70. Tomorrow we're going to have to actually look at the observations themselves to see what they end up being, but we have seen that on the Dixie Fire, where last time we had a really good smoke inversion, the forecast was for 95 degrees, and then it ended up being 72. So most likely going to see that come down tomorrow. Humidity looks like it's still extremely dry out there. So even though the winds will be calmer, it is still extremely dry. There's a lot of critically dry fuels in this area, a lot of very steep, rugged terrain. So while the winds are calming and that should lead to reduced fire behavior tomorrow, it is still going to be very dry, so we will most likely still see some activity going on. Now, again, just in case you missed it, the big thing we're going to be watching is Monday afternoon, we're going to continue to follow this forecast as it continues to progress and get better, because Monday afternoon looks like our relative humidity is in the single digits, which is critical. Temperatures are still on the warm side, but most importantly, wind gusts are going to be picking up to 35 to 40 miles per hour. Most likely going to be seeing a red flag warning coming into play on Monday. But with that being said, next couple of days are looking much better on the Dixie Fire. If we look at the Wildfire Fire simulation, you'll basically see that play out. It's almost hard to look at the entire fire at the same time because it's so big. Where the Wildfire Fire model simulation is still predicting some growth is on that northern side right there, where you see some of that color right there. And then this was the prediction for the fire throughout the day today. It was expecting to see more of that growth on the southeastern side, which ended up exactly happening. And then now we're going to get into tomorrow's forecast. You can see in the early morning hours, you have those down canyon winds. And then around 12 or 1 o'clock, those winds start to shift around and move to a more southwesterly direction, usually. But it looks like we're having a different wind pattern tomorrow, at least according to this model. So I want to replay that because something very interesting happened there. Usually, the model just flips around. You get southerly winds pushing this fire farther to the north, and then you get southwesterly winds pushing the fire farther to the northeast. But I want to zoom into this area to see what it's predicting throughout the day tomorrow. So this is tomorrow at 8:45 in the morning. And then it looked like it was predicting some strong winds picking up in the afternoon at about 1 or 2 o'clock. Some gusty, erratic winds, and then leading to a very large amount of fire spread right there, almost northeasterly winds. But that is where I will say the caveat, while that perhaps would have happened without any fire suppression tactics or personnel, the good news is that we still have, that's not the link, we still have 4,833 personnel in this fire. They've been working very hard in the southeastern section for a number of days now. So while the model's predicting that, I don't actually believe we will see that growth in that area, because one thing is that the model doesn't take into account those fire suppression tactics. So I don't think we'll see that growth, but it is a good reminder of how lucky we are to have firefighters, because that is what may have happened if we had no firefighters or suppression strategies in place. So I think that pretty much wraps up the Dixie Fire right there. Again, key area that there's really two spots that continue to burn, that northern area there and that southeastern area right there. That's the spot that we're going to keep a very close eye on as we move forward, because that is the area that's the closest to the largest amount of structures. The good news is that we have relatively weak winds over the next couple of days, so most likely going to get a smoke inversion over the fire, reduced fire behavior over the next couple of days. But then we have to look at Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, where some of those strong winds start to return on the Dixie Fire. Now, just zooming out here, you can see we still have a very large amount of fires to cover, and I've already gone over the time that I was originally trying to end this by, but we're going to continue anyway. So, because there are still a large amount of fires to cover. So, we'll try to be a bit more brief as we move forward, because basically the weather forecast is going to be the same for everybody. So, try to do this a bit quicker. You can see there was some activity going on with some of those lightning fires in the northwestern part of California. Those were those fires that started last 28th, 29th, and 30th, where we had the Mcfarland Fire, Monument Fire, River Complex. Looks like most of that smoke is coming off of the River Complex. So let's just go over here and then look at the live hotspots. Yeah, most of that activity looks to be on the River Complex, but unfortunately, we do still have those hotspots right around Hayfork, which is the area that we've been watching the closest over the last maybe week or two. We've been watching Hayfork ever since those northerly winds came in and started to push the Monument Fire down farther to the south. That's been what our main concern on the Monument Fire, but good news is I know that they have made this a priority. In the last map that I checked, it looked like the fire was holding on their previous containment line. So when it comes to the Monument Fire, we can look at what it looked like throughout the day today. So you can see that thick smoke inversion we had. So that's part of the reason that we're seeing less of those hot spots on the map today than in previous days, is because not as much solar radiation is able to come through, and we also had reduced winds compared to previous days, but you do still see some smoldering right there, and that's that camera that almost looks directly into Hayfork right there. But when it comes to the Monument Fire, you can see it is up to 160,000 acres, but it is at 20% containment there, so starting to see that come up. Looks like most of that containment is on that western edge right there, hoping to see some containment pop up on that southern edge as we move forward. I'm actually curious to see. So zooming in here, you can see where those black crosses are. This is exactly what I wanted to show, because you can see how much work they've been putting in to protect the area around Hayfork, and as of right now, everywhere where they have those containment lines, it seems to be stopping that fire in its tracks. So let's hope that continues to be true. And it's also great to see that we now have containment around Junction City, which will also protect Weaverville if the fire ever were to come back this direction. And then looks like the northern edge of Burnt Ranch is still an area where it's uncontained. But I think that's the key thing I wanted to point out, is looks like where we have those black X's where it shows containment, looks like the Monument Fire has been stopping in its tracks. But with that being said, as always, never take my word for it. And if that is the case, sometimes that could be a good lesson for why we sometimes take this map with a grain of salt. Personnel, we'll continue to update that one. But with that, there's not as many structures directly around where the fire seems to be burning. But do have to mention it because it does look like that was one of the more active fires in California throughout the day today. Now you also see some of that smoke coming off of the Antelope fire up there. That's another one where we continue to see some activity, but it's not near that many structures. Actually looks like much. Is that really the Antelope fire right there? Wow, so that one has significantly calmed down. Just seeing that one little spot right there, that's great to see. But when it comes to the Antelope fire right there, that one is at 71,000 acres, 42% containment. And then you got a little sneak peek at the other fire to go over that was part of all those lightning fires. It is the Mcfarland fire. You can see we did still have that hot spot yesterday, but much reduced activity on the Mcfarland fire. Can't really even see any hot spots coming off of that right now. If we look at the imagery throughout the day today, kind of hard to tell because there's so much smoke just drifting over California, but not seeing any smoke coming off of the Mcfarland fire throughout the day today. So that is actually great news, because if we zoom out on this map, you can see that the Mcfarland fire is directly under a red flag warning. So with that red flag warning, it looks like it's from the 27th 8 a.m. to the 28th at 11 a.m. As always, it's most likely just due to gusty northerly winds and some very low relative humidity, steep terrain, critical fire weather conditions. But the good news is that the Mcfarland seems to have calmed down significantly over the last few days. So hopefully this red flag warning doesn't flare things back up again, but we will keep an eye on it. Now, while I'm here, it's also great to see that, one sec. Sorry about that. I had to get a quick sip of water. So the thing I want to say is great to see that red flag warning isn't over the Dixie Fire, isn't over the Monument Fire, isn't over the River Complex, because those fires remain much more active. if we had to pick a fire for that red flag warning to be over, we most likely would have picked the Mcfarland, because that one, just based on the heat signatures, looks like it's basically out at this point. But again, as always, check the link in the description for all the recent evacuation orders and warnings. I'm not sure if there's still, looks like there actually was an update, but I'll leave that to you to be able to click on, because now we do need to look at some of the other fires that are going on. I want to look at the French fire first. So French fire is down right here. I think it'd actually be easier to see it if we look at this map right here. So that is the French fire. Just north of that, we have the Walker's fire. So French fire and Walker's fire, you can see both of those smoke plumes throughout the day today. And when it comes to the French fire, I'm very interested to see where those hot spots were throughout the day today, because this was a fire that was extremely active in previous days, but based on that smoke plume throughout the day today, looks like it had calmer behavior. There's still a decent amount of smoke coming off of that, actually. But when it comes to the French fire, interested to see what the hotspots are looking like right now. So yeah, it does look a little bit calmer than in previous days, but certainly still active and kicking up some smoke. The good thing to see is that at one point it looked like those hotspots were getting closer and closer to where we have a large amount of structures right here. And it looks like that part of the fire on the eastern edge has started to calm down, which isn't too big of a surprise, because if you look at the terrain right here, and somebody pointed this out in my live chat, I won't take full credit for figuring this one out, but somebody pointed out that it's going downhill right here, and fires don't like to go downhill. They like to go uphill for reasons that I could briefly explain it. When a fire is tilting uphill, the flames are able to preheat some of the fuels, because you can think about how those flames are tilting closer to those fuels. So the fuels get preheated, and then by the time the fire gets to it, those fuels are ready to just burst into flames. Whereas the opposite happens when a fire is going downhill. The fuels below the fire, the direction it's moving, are actually in the opposite direction of where all that heat is moving. So then the fire has to really heat it up before it can burst those fuels into flame. So hopefully that made sense. That was just a skinny version on what is normally a full lesson in wildfire behavior, but right there you can see it's mostly downhill in that area. So as the fire was just slowly moving, they were able to make some progress, but we do still see some activity up there, and we are going to have to try to find some updated numbers on that community right there, because that was an area in the past where it looked like it was underneath those heat signatures. Now, there was some imagery coming out of the French fire today, so you can see where that camera is looking up at Alta Sierra right there. And one thing I'm not sure is if those trees are so red because they're completely dead, or if they had some retardant dropped on them. But right there, that's where you see the fires start to flare up. That's what I wanted to show. And then throughout the rest of the day, you can see just periodically keep seeing that smoke plume start to pulse. And it does look like this is an area where we had stronger winds than in some of our other fires. We're not just getting a very thick smoke inversion over the fire. You're seeing that smoke being pushed out of there, which tells you that there were some strong winds in place. Now, want to just check this camera as well to see if we see anything different. Looks like there are some smoldering areas. You notice right there it almost kind of looks like a smoke inversion, but as the winds pick up in the afternoon, some of that smoke should start to get pushed out of there. I haven't actually seen this video yet. There you can see that new smoke plume being produced. And pretty similar shot to that other one. You can see basically the summary on that is that the French fire did have activity throughout the day today, and it looks like there is a large amount of very thick and in some cases dead fuels in this area. So with the French fire, it's up to 22,000 acres and 19% containment. And on that one, we now have over 1,000 personnel. So I would love to count how many personnel are on all of these different fires that we're talking about, because it seems like Dixie Fire is still at about 5,000. Caldor almost has 3,000. Monument has 1,000. This one had 1,000. So lots and lots of fire personnel working very hard throughout California right now based on all these different fires that we have going on. So the other fire that I wanted to do an update on was the South Fire. Now, might be easier to see it if we look at this map right here. You can see the South Fire right there and the Westward Fire just to the southeast of it. So if we look on this map, I'm interested to see first what kind of hotspots we still have on it, because when I show the live camera shots, I believe there was a fair bit of activity on the South Fire throughout the day today. So I believe it's right here. And then you can see the Westward Fire down there. So just clicking in here, and then while this is loading, it could be a good opportunity to say apologies for not looking at the live chat at all throughout this video. I'm not sure if people have been posting questions, but did just want to, there's so many different fires to cover. I wanted to try to stay as focused as possible on what was actually going on. So South Fire, it does look like we still have some hot spots going on, and if we actually want to see what that looked like throughout the day today, I haven't actually looked at this video, but yeah, you can see that smoke plume coming off of the South Fire right there. This, I believe, is in San Bernardino County. And let's see if it flares back up as we get to the warmer, windier part of the day. It looks like it actually started to calm down a little bit. It was almost the strongest in the early morning hours. So that's opposite of what you'd usually expect, but big explanation, if I had to guess, it's because they have a lot of resources. In some cases, you can see those aircraft flying into this area. So it looks like they were able to do some great suppression efforts throughout the day today. And when it comes to the South Fire, that one is up to 680 acres and 0% containment as of right now. When it comes to the personnel, that one is at 366 as of right now. And then with some of the other fires, I'm just going to I did want to show that with the South Fire, we did get up to 18 structures destroyed. So that was some new information that did come out over the last 24 hours. So I did want to update on that. But then with the other fires, we had the one that was just to the southeast of the South Fire was the Westward Fire. That one's at 200 acres and 10% containment. Interested actually to see if we still have hotspots on that one. So Modus, we can see where it was yesterday. I believe it's those hotspots right there. Goes live, doesn't show any. So that should be some good news for the Westward Fire. But again, I purposely don't stay updated with all the evacuation warnings and orders because I don't want to give out some information and have somebody watch this 24 hours later and then the evacuation orders have changed. But I do put the links for these in the description. And then the last fire to take a look at, it might be actually easier to find on this map first, is that's the Washington Fire. And we have, just trying to zoom in there, there's two like right next to each other. We have the Washington Fire, and it's not letting me click the other one. And the, not exactly sure how to pronounce this one, the Airola Fire. So Airola Fire is at 700 acres burned and 10% containment. And the Washington Fire is at 81 acres burned and 5% containment. So, and I think the summary of that is that there are a very large amount of wildfires going on throughout California. Key thing that you probably notice is that from those wildfires, less of that smoke is just being thrown directly into Oregon, Nevada, or Idaho. With those calmer winds that we're having over the next couple of days, that smoke is starting to settle back down into California and directly over our fires. Now, that can be good news because if you get a thick smoke inversion, it'll make your temperatures cooler. and which then makes your winds calmer, which reduces your fire behavior. So from a fire behavior aspect, and when it comes to fire spread, I actually like to see the smoke settling down over the fires. But where the bad news does come in is when it comes to air quality, where you can see that California has some very poor air quality right now. Most of the state is in that moderate range where it's yellow, but then where you actually have those fires, you can see over the river complex, we actually have very unhealthy to hazardous air. Dixie Fire mostly in that unhealthy air quality. Caldor Fire and Lake Tahoe is in that very unhealthy air quality. I think that one's not a big surprise. Seeing some of the footage coming out of Tahoe over the last week, you can see how that smoke looks like actually less of it blowing directly into Tahoe as the winds have calmed down, but certainly settling over the Caldor Fire as of right now with that very unhealthy air. And then now that we have some new fires in Southern California, we have that unhealthy air down in that area as well. Now, if we want to see how all that smoke is going to be moving over the next maybe 24 hours, if this decides to play, there we go. So you can see lots of smoke being produced by the river complex, Dixie Fire, Caldor Fire, French Fire, and then you notice how different this map looks from previous days when I've shown it. In previous days, all that smoke is blowing up into Nevada, Oregon, Idaho. With those weaker winds, that smoke is able to just settle down into California. So places in Sacramento Valley, in the Bay Area, maybe even working into San Joaquin Valley as well, most likely going to be seeing more of that smoke tomorrow morning, and then more of that smoke over the next couple of days as well, as we do have those weaker winds. So I do want to end with that fire weather forecast, because that is going to be the big thing that we're talking about moving forward, and I think it really sums up all of our fires. It's the fact that over the next couple of days, I want to make sure we're at the beginning here. Over the next couple of days, we have this ridge building in and this high pressure, which means there's going to be weaker winds, which is why we're just seeing that smoke settling down into California more than it was in previous days. But that should be leading to some reduced fire behavior. But then the big story is as we get into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and that trough starts to build in, that's where we will be returning to some critical fire weather conditions once again. So just to sum up the forecast for California for tomorrow, much weaker winds. You could see on the Dixie Fire back into the teens for our strongest wind gusts, and most likely will be even less than that with that smoke inversion we'll be getting. But then especially looking at the area around the Caldor Fire, we start to see a pickup on Sunday, getting some gusts up to 30 miles per hour, and then on Monday, that's where the gusts can get up to 40, and then on Tuesday, we're even seeing some areas where there's the possibility of 45 mile per hour wind gusts. So looks like, I think, the key story that we're going to be following over the next few days is this forecast. Again, weather forecast models, especially more than 3 days out, are never perfect, so we're going to have to see how this weather forecast changes. And the big reason is because with those 40 mile per hour gusts that are forecasted for Monday and Tuesday coming from the southwest, that is going to unfortunately create some pretty big challenges on the Caldor Fire, and especially in the area where we do not want to see any more growth than we've already had, and that's on that northeastern section of the fire. The main reason for that is because you can see around South Lake Tahoe and really the whole area between the Caldor Fire and Lake Tahoe, you can see all of those structures. So that's why our key concern moving forward is going to be those wind gusts coming in Monday and Tuesday, and the effects that that might have on pushing this fire farther to the northeast and possibly leading to some spot fires as well. So if you want to stay updated with that, as well as all of the other fires that we're following throughout California, you can subscribe to this channel where I try to do these updates and forecasts every single day. Apologies again for not looking at the live chat at all throughout the course of this video. Hopefully in future videos I'll have more time to make it more interactive. Big thing I'll say is big thank you to the moderators. I see Lucy is still on, doing a great job. Big thank you to all the firefighters out there, and then also thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. So I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching. I'll see you all tomorrow.